Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Stakeholder Engagement. This is the fifth in our webinar series of the Smart H2. I'm Paul McCormack, the Gencomm Project Manager from Belfast Met. We lead an international team of hydrogen specialists looking at hydrogen deployment to meet the energy needs of a decarbonising Europe and how we engage across all of those opportunities. Hydrogen is the catalyst driving Europe's energy transition. It's in the news everywhere we look. In all of our different webinars, we're looking now to try and engage further and broaden the reach, provide the opportunity for communities and individuals in industry to engage in the hydrogen journey. How do we optimize that journey, though? By looking at smart hydrogen, through the valorization of the hydrogen supply chain, production, storage, all key to that successful hydrogen Europe and key to reducing our CO2 footprint by 2050, which is the net zero target. This is the final webinar in our spring series focused on smart hydrogen, looking at the benefits across all the different communities. How do we accelerate the cost reductions? How do we increase community engagement and put communities at the start of the energy chain instead of where they are at the end? Today's agenda, and Paul McCormack, as I said, given the welcome introduction, Jan Hildebrand from our German partner ITSIS, it will talk about enhancing stakeholder engagement. And Tony, the Programme Manager of Hydrogen Ireland Association, will look at empowering hydrogen integration. How do we spread that message and get greater engagement from those in the energy journey? And then we have Bart Bijbuk from the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, and Bart's presentation on hydrogen in the European energy systems. At the end of each of the sessions, we'll have a short Q&A, which is our normal format, and then after all the sessions, we'll have the main Q&A at the table. We try to keep the presentations down to 15-20 minutes to engage with you, the audience, to make sure that whilst we have, because of COVID now, we're in what we call a digital first environment, we're there to inform and be informed. You'll see the chat function there on the right hand side. Use that. Present your thoughts, present questions, present ideas. It's an interactive forum. We want to engage with the audience to make sure that whilst we're sharing a message, we're also in receipt of a message. As I've said earlier, this is the last of our spring series. We've gone from hydrogen optimization, green hydrogen supply, looking at infrastructure and storage, demand and use, and now the most important of them, that's stakeholder engagement. How do we give people that opportunity or present the on-ramp for them to engage in either technology or the social end of it, on the environmental end of it? And that's a lot of the stuff that will be covered in today's presentations. How do we get you now to move? Net zero by 2050 is the European goal. How do we make sure all of the countries involved in the projects that we're working in and the partners and you, the audience, can gain not just a commercial opportunity, but an environmental opportunity to get on that journey? The energy sector is one of the leading sectors that is responding to global climate change. Last week, the 18th of May, the International Energy Authority presented their net zero by 2050 roadmap. Their roadmap shows what they need to do or what they need to devolve. But the roadmap is quite narrow. How do we broaden that two-lane road into a highway, a hydrogen highway, which gives a greater acceleration towards net zero by the midterm 2030 and by the end term 2050? How do we get greater technology adoption and greater stakeholder engagement? Today's the capital of today's presentation. Get more engagement from all stakeholders, not just communities, the public sector, the private sector, industry. How do we all play that part? Increase the lanes on that hydrogen highway to make sure that we can get to 2050 and get there with greater acceleration. It requires immediate action from everybody to transform that energy opportunity and the spectrum. The link to the IEA report is there, and I presented to you using that. One of our journeys is not just about technology. As we make this net transition to net zero, it has to be a just transition. How do we make sure people are empowered, people are engaged, and there are none left behind? There are no stranded assets, either physical or persons. One of the key ways of doing that is address the challenges that the workers face. How do we present reskilling opportunities? How do we give workers the greater skillings now to engage and create those zero carbon commercial opportunities, and give them long-term plans to help not just drive to net zero, but sustain that journey? Our energy sector is now becoming more and more dominated by renewables. replacing fossil fuels, but that in itself presents challenges. How do we get more renewables in, and how do we use hydrogen as that energy vector? Using wind, solar, bioenergy, and geothermal, and use hydrogen as that energy catalyst to increase the penetration of renewables, overcome the dispatch and the curtailment, and accelerate that growth for 2050. You'll see there that the goals of the IEA want to increase 20-fold by 2050 and wind by 11-fold for PV and wind. Those are the targets. Those targets present opportunities. Opportunities for communities, the voluntary sector, the public sector, and the private sector to engage and create those links. But the transition to net zero is for and about people, not just technology. The transition in scale and speed of this cannot be achieved without public engagement. And that's what the webinars and the smart hydrogen and through our Gencomm projects and our dissemination with the Community Hydrogen Forum led by Dr. Roy Monaghan in Galway, to engage, to inform, to empower, and to shape, to get people to participate and make sure then that companies and the industry and governments start developing those hydrogen strategies, those hydrogen opportunities that people can curtail off. Clean energy jobs are growing stronger, but they must be spread more widely. How do we make sure that the industry in France, industry in Germany, Italy, Ireland, UK, all are able then to engage and spread those jobs across to create that just transition? The targets there are 14 million jobs by 2030 in the pathway. That will now increase to a further 16 million once we go beyond that and look at energy efficient construction and then start looking at energy efficiency and reducing the carbon footprint of all our sectors. That's what the journey to net zero means by 2050, is use that energy wisely, but use the energy as the catalyst for further growth and further integration. Clean energy jobs will grow strongly, but they're spread widely. Net zero by 2050 will require huge leaps in clean energy innovation. We have enough technology there to get us to the 2030 roadmap, which is not that far away, but it's going to take increased innovation, increased integration to get to 2050. Reaching 2050 by net zero requires that rapid deployment in the available technologies. A lot of the global reductions can be achieved by 2030, but as I've said, we need to look at other opportunities. That's one of the things we're doing in Gencomm and the partners with Horizon Europe calls coming up. How do we spread the net wider? Look at different opportunities, different partners. And on Monday and Tuesday, there are Horizon Europe matchmaking sessions that we're taking part in to look at the work that we're doing within Gencomm, how we share that, how we exchange that with other partners and build on it to get from the 2030 to 2050 goals, looking now beyond the just transport and mobility at industry, at shipping, and all of the different opportunities. Looking towards engagement, as 2030 and 2050 are those targets moving down, how does everybody play their part and become more engaged? How do we accelerate that clean energy transition? And some of the projects we're working on in Gencomm, which is the hydrogen zero emissions supply chains, Hazel. We're looking at hydrogen catalyst, H2CAT, and looking at host hydrogen optimization support tool. How do we get further engagement with the wider stakeholder? And Jan Hildebrand will cover that in his talk today. It's not just about technology, it's about people. Transition to sustainable supply chains and mainstream renewables. That transition to net zero will depend on a skilled workforce. That's why Belfast Met are leading the Gencomm project. We're working with a lot of other partners, specifically in Northern Ireland, in Mid and East Antrim and the council there, and work with other wider partners to develop skills and training at different levels to empower the workforce, empower industry to engage. We're building on the skills and knowledge in the transition and developing new labour markets, producing those green quality jobs and pioneering digitalization as that delivery model so that people can upskill whilst in work and in shorter, faster times. We talked about net zero requiring huge leaps in clean energy innovation. This is not just the remit of industry, it's also the remit of the governments and the public sector. How do they put in place innovation techniques, innovation opportunities, and innovation strands to promote and support industry to make that transition? How do we then start moving towards demonstration and prototype phases from 2030 and move what we're doing in Gencomm currently into mainstream? The work that Energy are doing on wind to hydrogen, the work that ACES are doing on solar to hydrogen and Pure Energy are doing on bio to hydrogen is now becoming mainstream because of the work carried out this last 5 years in Gencomm, has demonstrated the need for hydrogen as a catalyst, has demonstrated that hybrid solutions are going to be able to mix and suit different geographical remits, but also different technology remits, and develop solutions that people then can use. Those are mainstream in the work we're doing and carrying that further forward so we can push that on. One thing before we move on to our next speaker, folks, we normally start with a poll, and that poll gets people on their feet thinking, what is today's webinar about? So instead of a poll today, we're looking to reach out to you, the group and the audience, to think, get your thoughts. What does stakeholder engagement in the hydrogen highway mean to you? What does it mean commercially, environmentally, and socially? How do you engage? Where are the blockages? Where are the obstacles? What assistance would you need, or what impetus would you need to overcome some of the obstacles? Or how do you see the opportunities coming up? So today's chat function, rather than a poll, is during today's webinar, give us your thoughts. What does stakeholder engagement mean to you, and how do we help you achieve that? How do we work in a wider group? Share the work through the Community Hydrogen Forum in Gencomm. Share it through the Gencomm website we're doing. Hydrogen Ireland, the association on the island for the hydrogen promotion, and engage wider. And then network through our European partners in Hydrogen Europe and the Fuel Cell Association to make sure that what we're doing is shared, but we're also in receipt mode. So as we go through today's webinar with Jan, with Anne and Bart, have a think about that, folks. What does stakeholder engagement mean to you? And what would you see as the way to move forward so that you benefit either socially, environmentally, or commercially, and that your industry or your public sector or your community then benefits, as we said, moving that energy chain across and moving that forward. So if you can, during today's webinar, give us those opportunities, give us those thoughts. Normally, as I said, we have a poll, but rather than the poll, we want to engage further with you, the audience. So make it more interactive today, folks. All of the slides from today will be available to all of the attendees next week. The recordings also will be available in 2 weeks. So again, the standard format rules apply. If you don't catch all of the presentations, we will send them out to you. You engage. We welcome your feedback. This is the last in this series, and it's the last in the second series. We had Gencomm at the start and then Smart Hydrogen. Our next series will be September, October, post the Horizon Europe, hopefully post-COVID lockdown when we're starting getting back into engagement and what we need to do. So again, your thoughts on what topics you want to be able to do, what thoughts. We're working with the company Endeavour, and they're looking at waste energy. They'll be one of the presenters in our next series. So if there are audience members out there that want to present or your thoughts for the presentation, please feel free to give us your thoughts. You have our emails, you have our contacts. We want to engage wider. Joanna Wilson, who's our producer in the background, welcomes all those, and she captures all those and makes sure you, the audience, are engaged with and kept up to speed. So folks, this is the last in our series. It's the most important one. It's stakeholder engagement. How do we mobilize communities, industry, and the public sector to develop and sustain a low carbon economy? How do we get the skills, the jobs, the opportunities, and move that forward?